Bloodbath in Brno, the Harok family massacre, true crime documentary. A quiet family in Brno. The Harok family, residing in the quiet city of Brno in the Czech Republic, seemed like an ordinary family to outsiders. The head of the household, Jan Harok, was a middle-aged man who worked as a factory supervisor. His wife Martina was a caring mother and homemaker, devoted to their two children, Michaela, 16, and Lucas, 12. The family lived in a modest but comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood where they were well liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted the tragedy that would unfold on the evening of January 11, 2004. The Harok family, like many others in Brno, went about their daily lives without any indication of the impending horrors. On that fateful evening, the tranquility of their home would be shattered, leaving the community in shock and disbelief. The events that unfolded would haunt the people of Brno for years to come. The question of who could commit such a brutal act lingering in the minds of the public. What happened inside that house would forever change the course of the Harok family's history and remain a chilling mystery for many years. The brutal discovery. It was late in the evening when neighbors became concerned about the Harok family. No one had seen or heard from them in over a day, which was unusual for such a close-knit family. A neighbor, suspicious of the prolonged silence, decided to check on them. What they found inside the Harok home was nothing short of horrifying. When the door was forced open, the scene inside revealed the extent of the carnage. Jan and Martina were found in the living room, both brutally murdered. Their son Lucas was found in his bedroom, also dead, while their daughter Michaela was discovered in the kitchen, the victim of a savage attack. All four members of the Harok family had been violently killed, each of them bludgeoned with blunt force objects. The brutality of the crime was staggering, and the police were called immediately. Investigators arrived at the scene to find a home filled with blood and evidence of a savage and senseless attack. The horrific nature of the crime left the small town in shock, and the police were left grappling with the unsettling question of who could have carried out such an act of violence. Initial investigations and immediate theories. The investigation began immediately, with law enforcement trying to piece together what had happened inside the Harok family home. The lack of forced entry into the house suggested that the killer or killers were known to the family, which immediately pointed the investigation in a few potential directions. One of the first theories was that the attack could have been the result of a robbery gone wrong. However, this theory didn't hold up for long, as nothing valuable appeared to have been taken from the home. The police then considered the possibility of a domestic dispute lead to the murders. Given that the family had no apparent enemies, the idea that someone close to them might be involved began to gain traction. Investigators looked into the family's background, examining the relationships between the parents and their children, as well as any potential conflicts in the family dynamic. However, all seemed normal on the surface. There was no history of violence or abuse that would have pointed to a motive. The case was quickly becoming more complex, and the detectives were left with more questions than answers. The suspects and the first lead. As the investigation progressed, detectives began to focus on the Harok family's inner circle, specifically the people who had close contact with the family on a regular basis. Initially, the police interviewed friends, extended family, and acquaintances to rule out potential suspects. However, a breakthrough came when investigators began to scrutinize the family's social life. A former acquaintance of Jan Harok, a man named Jiri Novak, quickly became a person of interest. Novak had previously been involved in a business venture with Jan, but had a falling out several months before the murders. According to reports, the two men had a heated argument over money, which may have left some bad blood between them. While there was no direct evidence connecting Novak to the crime scene, his proximity to the family, coupled with the apparent motive of a personal dispute, made him a viable suspect. The police brought Novak in for questioning, hoping to learn more about the relationship between him and the Harok family. As the investigation into Novak intensified, the case began to take a darker turn, and the truth was slowly starting to emerge. A violent past revealed. As investigators delved deeper into Jiri Novak's past, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of violent behavior. Novak had a history of aggressive confrontations, and it became apparent that he was no stranger to violence. He had been involved in several altercations in the past, including physical assaults, and had spent time in prison for his involvement in a robbery several years earlier. Despite this history, Novak had managed to maintain a relatively low profile in recent years, living in a small apartment on the outskirts of Brno. However, his violent tendencies made him a person of interest in the Harok family massacre. Investigators learned that Novak had been in the Harok family's home just days before the murders. The argument between him and Jan over their failed business venture seemed to have triggered something inside Novak, who reportedly expressed a desire to settle things once and for all. With these revelations, the police began to focus more intently on Novak as the prime suspect, piecing together the motive behind the killings and trying to determine if he had finally acted on his violent impulses. The arrest of Jiri Novak. On January 16, 2004, just 5 days after the bodies of the Harok family were discovered, Jiri Novak was arrested for the brutal murders. His arrest came after a thorough investigation that uncovered compelling evidence linking him to the crime scene. Forensic evidence, including fingerprints found on objects inside the home, placed Novak at the scene of the murders. Additionally, Additionally, DNA samples were recovered that matched Novak's profile, further corroborating his involvement. During questioning, Novak initially denied any involvement in the killings, but the weight of the evidence eventually forced him to confess. He admitted to planning and carrying out the murders in a fit of rage over his failed business dealings with Jan Harok. Novak explained that he had gone to the Harok home on the night of the murders with the intention of confronting Jan, but things quickly escalated. The confrontation turned violent, and Novak ended up murdering all 4 members of the family in a fit of uncontrollable anger. He described the killings as a spur-of-the-moment decision, and he showed no remorse for his actions. The arrest of Novak brought some relief to the community, but the brutality of the crime left many still reeling. Novak's motive: greed and revenge. The motive behind the murders of the Harok family was rooted in greed and a desire for revenge. Juri Novak, frustrated by his failed business venture with Jan, became consumed by anger and bitterness. As the argument between the two men deepened, Novak's obsession with financial gain and the belief that Jan had wronged him intensified. Novak's anger was not just directed at Jan, it extended to the entire family, as he felt they had betrayed him by not supporting his endeavors. Novak's plan was to confront Jan and force him to agree to new terms, but when the confrontation turned violent, he acted on impulse, killing not just Jan, but his wife and children as well. The brutal nature of the killing suggested that Novak's rage was not just about money, but also about a sense of personal betrayal. It was clear that Novak harbored deep resentment toward the Harok family, and this resentment ultimately led to the tragic deaths of 4 innocent people. The investigation into Novak's motives revealed a man consumed by anger and greed, capable of unimaginable violence. The trial of Juri Novak. The trial of Juri Novak began in 2005, just over a year after the brutal murders. The courtroom was filled with emotion as the families of the victims came to terms with the tragic loss of their loved ones. Novak's defense team tried to argue that he had acted in the heat of passion and that his violent actions were a result of the intense emotional turmoil he was experiencing at the time. However, the prosecution presented a compelling case, citing the premeditated nature of the murders and the brutal way in which the Harok family had been killed. The evidence against Novak was overwhelming, and his confession played a pivotal role in securing a conviction. After weeks of deliberation, the jury found Novak guilty of all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction brought a sense of justice for the Harok family survivors, but the pain of their loss would never truly fade. The case was a tragic reminder of how a dispute over money and personal grievances could lead to senseless violence. The aftermath and the community's recovery. In the aftermath of the Harok family massacre, the community of Brno was left reeling from the shock of the crime. The brutal nature of the murder shattered the peaceful reputation of the neighborhood, and residents struggled to cope with the loss of 4 innocent lives. Many people in Brno had known the Harok family personally, and the crime left an indelible mark on the city. The family's death was not just a tragedy for their immediate relatives, but for the entire community, who had known them as warm and caring individuals. Support groups were formed to help the survivors cope with the emotional trauma, and the memory of the Harok family continued to live on in the hearts of the people who had known them. Though justice was served, the scars left by the massacre would take years to heal. The case also served as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked anger and the devastating consequences that can arise from a seemingly small disagreement. Lessons learned and the impact of the case. The Harok family massacre served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can arise from a combination of personal grievances, unchecked rage, and a thirst for revenge. Juri Novak's brutal actions left an indelible mark on the city of Brno and highlighted the dangers of unresolved conflicts, especially when they escalate into violence. The case also raised important questions about the role of financial disputes in fueling anger and resentment. The tragic deaths of the Harok family could have been avoided had Novak chosen to resolve his issues peacefully rather than resorting to violence. In the years since the case was solved, the people of Brno have continued to reflect on the senseless nature of the murders and the impact they had on the community. The lessons learned from the tragedy have helped raise awareness about the importance of conflict resolution and the need to address personal grievances before they spiral out of control. The Harok family's deaths, though tragic, have led to greater efforts to promote peace and understanding in the community, ensuring that their memory lives on in a more hopeful light.